Hi, Scott Walker here in Madison, Wisconsin, in our beautiful state capital. Thank you for joining us on Facebook Live. In a moment, we'll take some of the questions we've got as we asked for questions over the last few days. We've got an excellent list, and we tried to do a little research and give you some background on as many of the questions as we get through in about the next 20 to 30 minutes or so. We're going to do this occasionally just as a good way to interact and hear from people via Facebook and other forums out there. First off, it's a great time to be talking about the state of Wisconsin. We have in this year, in 2016, more people are employed in the state of Wisconsin than we've ever had in our state's history. The unemployment rate, again, this last month was down to 4.2%. That's consistently down for the last several months at 4.2%. And that's the lowest it's been prior to this time since March of 2001. So that's at a 15-year low. I put in perspective with my own kids, Matt and Alex, who are 22 and 21. The last time the unemployment rate was this low in the state of Wisconsin, Matt and Alex were 6 and 5 years old. So certainly a lifetime ago in many ways for them. It's also good because not only is unemployment down as it is nationally, although nationally we're at about 4.9%. Here in the state, we're at 4.2%. But one of the good things for us is that our labor force participation rate, that's the percentage of people actually working in the state, is one of the best in the country. We consistently are on the top 10, much higher than we see at the national level. Unfortunately, nationally, we're just above 62%. That's close to where we were as low back in 1977. In Wisconsin, we are much higher, and that's a good indicator that people are working, which is why the unemployment rate is down. So let's jump in and start talking about a number of questions. The first up was a question from a Larry M. It's concerning Wisconsin's ranking for new business startups. Larry asked, what can be done to make the business environment more favorable to startup businesses, starting new businesses, I should say. That's a great question, Larry. There's a number of things, but one of the things to keep in mind is the fact that since we took office in January of 2011, there have been some 70,000 new business formations registered here in the state of Wisconsin under our Department of Financial Institutions. So that's a good basis upon which to build on. And as Tom Still mentioned in a column earlier this year, the length of time that we see business formations, the survival rate, is actually one of those really good things. In fact, I looked at the numbers he cited in that report. According to the United States Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics, Wisconsin ranked 7th, had the 7th in terms of the 6-year survival rate of new startups, and it ranked 10th in terms of 10 years. So in both 6 and 10-year survival rates, we rank in the top 10. And that's really important because you can have all the startups in the world, but if they're not surviving after a number of years, that doesn't do you much good in terms of employment and opportunity. We've done a number of things. Excuse my cough this morning, a little bit of allergies. One of the great things that we've done is help a whole different spectrum of people when it comes to startups. A part of it was we put about $500,000 aside for entrepreneurs who come out of our armed services, our veterans. In fact, a little bit later today, I'll be at Bunker Labs helping them celebrate some of the good work they're doing to help men and women who serve our country, who now want to come back and start up their own businesses. That's just one facet of many. We've got everything from a special seed fund we've done from a combination at the University of Wisconsin and the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation under their Capital Catalyst program. We have that. We have venture capital. We put $25 million in for a special fund to be matched by private dollars to help in that regard. We've got a seed accelerator. We've got a number of other programs, and we just started just about 2 years ago crowdfunding, a new measure that allows for crowdfunding of up to $1 million here. We made some changes in terms of angel investment credits and making that more accessible, and we made some changes in terms of capital gains, making it more attractive for people to invest in startups here in the state of Wisconsin. So great question, Larry. Next question is from Fred from the city of Madison, who says, the city of Madison has allocated $3 million to be spent over the next 5 years to promote the creation of worker cooperatives. Would you support matching the city of Madison's $3 million allocation to promote the creation of worker cooperatives? Would you support expanding this program throughout the entire state? Well, when we think about dollars, we're not too far off. Next February, we'll bring about the next 2-year budget proposal I'll submit to the state legislature. Between now and then, part of the process we're using is listening to people, listening to stakeholders, talking to state agency heads, Each of our state agencies submitted their budget request just a few weeks ago in the middle of September. Between now and then we'll be looking at, but I want to tell you a little bit of our, our priorities as we consider questions like this about specific budget proposals. First off, we need, as we have in previous budgets, to put a substantial increase into Medicaid. That's the program that provides assistance for needy families, children, and seniors in particular here in the state of Wisconsin. Over the last 3 budgets prior to this time, we've had to put anywhere from $600 to $700 million into that because of the increase in the population, as well as other changes, and sadly because the federal government in many ways has pulled away from some of their previous commitments. And so typically that's been one of the fastest growing parts of our state budget, as it is for states all across this country. In fact, when I get together with other governors, Republican and Democrat alike, that's one of the areas we talk most about, is the growth that we see in areas like Medicaid and the problems that we have with the federal government making their commitments. But in this case, the good news is, at least from the current budget request from the Department of Health Services, they're looking at just over $500 million. Now that's still a lot of money, but that's much less than the increase that we've seen in previous budgets. In addition, I've talked about committing all of the money that we would save as we look at ways to reform the way we administer health insurance for state employees here in Wisconsin, not just in Madison, but across the state. And as I've publicly said before, I committed all the dollars that we would save that would otherwise go to the bottom line, to the general fund, to be used on supporting increases in funding for public education here in the state. Both my kids, Matt and Alex, went to public schools in Wauwatosa. My nieces, Isabella and Eva, still go to public schools as well. And I want to make sure for them and all the others like them across the state, they have access to great schools in the state, be it at a public school or some of the other options we do to support charter schools, home schools, virtual schools, and private schools here in the state. But all that new money I'm talking about in this case will go into our public schools in the state of Wisconsin. And then we've talked about putting more into the University of Wisconsin system, but tying it into what I call pay for performance. The idea being not just a blank check, but one of the big things I hear as the unemployment rate continues to drop is people saying, we have jobs, we just don't have enough people to fill those jobs. And so we put more money into worker training, into our technical colleges, and now one of the things we're looking to do going forward is to put more resources into the University of Wisconsin system, but tie it into performance. What I mean by that, as an example, is not just to increase enrollment, but to increase graduation rates, particularly in areas of high demand, whether it's in engineering, information technology, finance and accounting, certainly in education, looking at healthcare. All these are areas where there are shortages in the workforce today, and we need to make sure that they're filled. So those are going to be our spending priorities, certainly in terms of Fred's question about specific things like his particular interest. Those are things we'll look at, but it will be only after we fund those key priorities: Medicaid, caring for our needy families, children, and seniors out there, putting more into public education, and putting more into our higher education, both in the UW system and into our 16 outstanding technical colleges here in the state of Wisconsin. Next up was a question from Jim H., and he says, seeing as the budget has gone up 15% since you took office, why isn't there enough money to fix roads? You did pay back the transportation fund. Well, let's kind of put that in perspective. When we first came in, we inherited a budget deficit of $3.6 billion. I'm proud to say in each of the years since then, and including the end of this fiscal year, we finished the year off with a surplus, and we anticipate doing that going forward. I think that's what the people of the state expect. Now, we did that initially through a series of reforms that not only helped the state government balance its budget, but helped local governments as well. School districts, counties, towns, cities, and villages, something that was really important to me, having been a county official before taking office as your governor. And so we put in place reforms that not only helped balance the budget in 2011, but have consistently both helped balance budgets, but also helped provide more effective, more efficient, and more accountable government at both the state and the local level. Along the way, we've also made sure that when we had surpluses, that we put at least half of that, the unexpected surpluses, into our rainy day fund, a rainy day fund that was hardly there when we took office. In fact, today I'm proud to say that our rainy day fund is 165 times bigger than when we first took office, the largest in state's history. And then for anything above that, we tried to give as much of it as we could back to you, the hardworking taxpayers of the state. It's why today I'm proud to say that property taxes we paid last December were lower for a median valued home in this state than they were in December of 2010. And income taxes in the state are lower than they were in 2010 as well, helping our working families, our senior citizens, our small business owners, and our farmers and others across the state. So when we've seen a surplus come in, we've tucked a little bit away for the rainy day fund, and then we've given the rest back to you, the hardworking taxpayers of this state. And so that's really been important, and we put in place those improvements to balance our budget. But per the transportation budget, and I should just say as an aside, when we increased aid to our schools and when we increased aid to provide property tax relief, even though that's a tax cut, that's tax relief for you on your property tax bill or on your income tax bill, that actually gets counted as a spending increase. So when you hear some of the numbers that people banter around, remember that part of that is money that actually goes back to you in the form of tax relief, not new spending. But we looked at that overall and we said, okay, this is the budget that we have. And then we looked at transportation in particular and realized that under my predecessor, under Governor Doyle, the state rated $1.4 billion out of the state transportation fund and used it for non-transportation related activities. So that's the money you pay in your gas tax and things like the vehicle registration fee and other assorted fees like that that relate specifically to transportation. That money was rated and spent in other areas of the state budget. On top of that, to fill in some of that hole, they piled up about $1 billion in new bonding as well. And so we faced some real challenges. And over the past 5.5 years, almost 6 years now, we put more money back into the transportation fund, but we haven't been able to backfill in the total amount that was rated. Going forward, though, what we've said for the request that I made of my secretary, the head of our State Department of Transportation, and the budget he submitted on September 15th showed this to reflect that change, is that we wanted our attention in this transportation budget to be on safety and maintenance of the existing system. That's why you see dramatic new increases, some that are, in some cases, the biggest we've seen in a decade and a half for local governments to help our cities and our towns, our counties and our villages rebuild their roads and their bridges and other important infrastructure. We put the most amount ever into the state highway rehabilitation program, and we kept on track a couple of key programs that had been in the pipeline for some time. The special major construction of I-39 and 90 from the state line up to Madison through Rock County, critically important to places like Beloit and Janesville, as well as another big project with the 441-10 interchange up in the Fox Valley. We did, however, though, to offset that, reduce the amount of money that we put into the Milwaukee area highway system. We've seen for years the mega projects down there eat up over the last 6 years something like $1.5 billion. Those are projects that were started under our predecessor. We didn't want to stop them off, and under this budget, we complete the core of the Zoo interchange in the middle of the Milwaukee-Wauwatosa area. But we don't set out going forward on some of the new big projects that were planned and dreamed for in the past. Instead, we send that money around the rest of the state. But over the last 6 years, let's be clear, we've invested some $18 billion into transportation, the transportation fund in this state. And that's about $2 billion more than what we saw the 6 years before we took office, just as a way to compare the two. And so we've made significant investments into transportation. We will going forward. We heard loud and clear that people want that money spent on roads and bridges in communities and counties all across the state. And so that's really the focal point we put in this transportation budget, which has been submitted to us, but largely will remain intact with the budget we submit to the state legislature come the first week of February. One other interesting thing, we also heard loud and clear that people didn't want excessive bonding. And so the bonding included in this transportation budget request is the lowest we've seen in a decade and a half. That's on top of the fact that last year, overall bonding in the state was the lowest that we've seen in some 20 years. So great question, Jim. Next up, let's see, the next question was actually from a lawmaker, Senator Dewey Strobel. Dewey Strobel asked another question in regards to the Department of Transportation budget proposal. He said, given the competitive tax environment between states and the impact that taxes have on businesses' growth, can you discuss how holding the line in transportation taxes and fees, insurance companies can grow competitively in Wisconsin? Well, I'm proud to say overall that since we've taken office, we've reduced the burden on you, the hardworking taxpayers of this state, by some $4.5 billion. As I mentioned, property taxes are lower today than they were back in December of 2010. Income taxes are down across the board, although the biggest concentration of that tax relief falls in the middle of the bracket for middle class taxpayers in this state. We've seen competitive tax reductions for some of our key industries like agriculture, thinking of our farmers and agribusiness in this state. We've seen it for manufacturing, which has been really the lifeblood of the middle class in the state historically for quite some time. Today in Wisconsin, in manufacturing and agriculture, we've wiped out almost all the major tax liability, which is why, for example, in places like Kenosha, you see a stream of companies coming north over the state line from places like Illinois to come into our state because it's much more competitive. And with it, you see literally thousands of new jobs in that corridor along the state line because the state is more stable and because the tax environment's more competitive for businesses like that, and in turn, the good paying jobs they bring with them. And so that's been incredibly important. But Senator, as you referenced in your question, the last thing we want to do is go in reverse. Wisconsin historically, for decades, has had one of the highest gas taxes in the country, consistently had one of the highest gas taxes in the country, and at a time when we're finally seeing some recovery, when we're seeing the highest employment of Wisconsin citizens that we've seen in our state's history, the last thing we want to do is do anything to slow that down. If anything, we want to find ways to accelerate that. And so that's why I was pleased that with this budget recommendation by our State Department of Transportation, they met the challenge. The challenge I gave when I spoke to the voters 2 years ago, when I asked for your support in my reelection in 2014, I said explicitly when talking about transportation that I would not support an increase in the gas tax or the vehicle registration fee without a corresponding decrease in some other tax. The reason being, I don't want to see the people of this state, the hardworking families and the retirees and the others in this state see an increase in your overall tax burden, because I think that would be detrimental to our recovery. I think that would be detrimental to our quality of life. And so this budget that was presented by the Department of Transportation reflects that. It's the budget I will submit to the members of the state legislature. It will focus on no gas tax increase and no fee increase without a corresponding decrease elsewhere. And as I've said repeatedly in the last couple of weeks, I will not only present that, I want to make it clear, and I respect that there are people who have difference of opinions on this issue, and I certainly can understand and respect that, but I'm going to be true to what I said to you, the voters of the state of Wisconsin, and that is that I wasn't going to raise the gas tax, and I would not raise the vehicle registration fee without an equal or greater reduction in taxes elsewhere in this state budget. And I just think that's incredibly important. I'm not only going to present that, I'm going to make it clear that if the legislature sends me a budget that increases the overall burden on the taxpayers of the state, I will veto that down to make sure that that you don't see an overall increase. So I think that's really important. It's not only a matter of keeping my word, which in and of itself is incredibly important. I think it's important, as the question implies, because we want to send a message that part of being open for business is showing that we're making it easier, not harder, to put people to work here in the state. So, Dewey, great question. Next question comes from Pat S., who says, in regards to healthcare costs in Wisconsin, what cost savings are you considering for those on Medicaid or Badger Care? And have we looked at other states' efforts to optimize more cost-effective options and incentivize these on the ever-increasing number of patients qualifying for states' assistance based on these federal mandates? Well, the Medicaid and Badger Care are essentially components of the same thing. Medicaid, a portion of which comes from the state, portion comes from the federal government, are things that we've worked long and hard on to make sure that we provide assistance for people who truly need it, those who are the poor, those living in poverty, and help transition people living above that level into the workforce. Well, for that matter, for those who are able, our ultimate goal is to actually help those even living in poverty get into the workforce and transition from government dependence to true independence, which is being able to control their own lives and set their own dignity really through the power of hard work. And it's something that I think most people strive to. And so not only are we looking at specific reforms in terms of how healthcare is provided under programs like Badger Care and Badger Care Plus, but really to the larger question, one of our great focuses of late, and will be even greater in this next budget, is not just when it comes to Badger Care, but with food stamps, with other forms of public assistance. How do we help that transition? How do we help people move from the dependency on the clumsy hand of the government to really being able to control their own lives and set their own destinies. And how do we help people move into the workforce? And so I'm proud, for example, in this state today, through the help of the state legislature, we've been able to say that if someone is an adult who's able to work, by that I mean someone who's physically and mentally capable of working here in the state of Wisconsin, if they're in that situation and they want our assistance for things like food stamps, we now require them to be enrolled in our job training programs, either enrolled in job training or working for at least 80 hours a month or a combination of both, to be looking for work 5 days a week. And something we've added to it that we're in a bit of a confrontation with the federal government on, but what we think makes sense going forward is adding to that a series of filters to ensure that those individuals can also pass a drug test. The reason being is that I believe that welfare, that public assistance should be a trampoline, not a hammock. It's something where we should be willing and able to help our neighbors, our fellow citizens who are in their times of need our assistance. But if they are physically and mentally able to work, we also need to help them get back up on their feet again and get them the skills and the expertise that they need to go down that path. And so from our standpoint, whether it's on Badger Care, food stamps, other things, we want to help people make that transition. The job training programs that we have are working exceptionally well. Just with the program we started since last April, we've had over 16,000 people enter into the workforce, and they've been in good paying jobs. There are jobs that pay nearly $13 an hour, jobs where they've had significant hours. So these aren't just some meaningless jobs, as some critics might suggest. They've started out on a good path. Going forward, we want to continue to do that. And we want to continue to do it in a multitude of ways. Again, because ultimately the dignity of work is something that's just so powerful. I often say when talking about this, I grew up in a small town called Delavan, and I don't remember anybody in my high school graduating class ever signing a yearbook saying, "Good luck becoming dependent on the government." That just goes against our human nature. And so with these programs, with these reforms, we're going to build on that and help more people transition into the workplace. And one of the things we're looking to do in this next budget is find more ways to help people transition. Because in all the listening sessions we've had, some 64 strong already this year, one of the frequent things that comes up when we talk about the needs that we have in the workforce is, in addition to talking about education and training and other assistance we can provide to help prepare more employees to enter the workforce, one of the other things that we hear frequently are people saying, one of the challenges they hear about either when they try to hire someone or sometimes even with a current employee who's looking potentially to receive a promotion is that people often say they're not willing to either take the job or the new job because they're worried about giving up some of their benefits. And it's something that is of grave concern to those individuals, even though they want to work, they want to have a job. And so we're going to look in the future at more ways that we can help ease that transition, that we can wean people off of public assistance and help them into the workplace in a way that doesn't just get to a cliff and then expect that they're just going to have to jump into everything. When we do that, it'll be better, certainly for the taxpayers. It'll be better for employers who are looking for quality workers. But most of all, it'll be better for the people who really do want to work, but oftentimes have many obstacles. We need to remove those barriers and find more ways for people to ease into the workforce. So, great question. Next question comes from Chris Q, who says, please explain why you will not accept the Medicaid expansion federal money, but will accept federal dollars for highway and roads. Either accept federal money for safe purposes or you don't. Well, there are differences here. The question comes with what kinds of strings are attached. And in the case of the federal Medicaid expansion under Obamacare, the strings were attached. And as I mentioned before, one of the challenges every governor in this country faces is the fact that Medicaid is not only one of the biggest, fastest growing parts of our state budget, is that historically, part of the reasons why we've had to pay more state dollars for Medicaid in the past, or Medicaid related programs, is because the federal government in many cases has reneged on their promises. And I think going forward, one of the things we looked at is looking at a federal government today that has just about a $19.5 trillion budget debt, or a debt, not a budget debt, but a national debt, according to the national debt clock, $19.5 trillion debt. They can't even meet their own commitments, let alone those promises they've made going forward to the states and to others out there. In fact, you've seen some of the incentives they put to providers. They backed away from under the Affordable Care Act, or commonly called Obamacare. And so I just looked at that and said, I'm not going to put the taxpayers of Wisconsin at risk to have to backfill in the federal government backing away from its commitments. Even under the original bill, over a period of time, by next year, they'd start backing away from the 100% coverage, dropping it down by 10%. And that's just under what was written into the law, let alone the changes that they would make going forward. And so we've seen it before. We've seen it not only in Medicaid, we've seen it with special education, we've seen it with other federal mandates where they made a promise, and then when times got tight, Republican and Democrat alike, they backed away. And I just didn't want to put the state and the taxpayers of the state on the hook for those dollars. Having said that, though, we did something unique. See, far too often at the local and state level, when we deal with federal mandates, we accept the false choice that you either do it one way or the other. In this case, the false choice was you either have to take Medicaid expansion and provide coverage for an expanded number of people, or you don't, and people don't get access to key programs. In our case, because of a part of the federal ruling on Obamacare, we actually did something quite unique. For the first time in our state's history, because of changes we put in place a few years ago, we're now able to cover everyone. Every single person living in poverty is covered under a Medicaid program, Badger Care. That's because my predecessor expanded eligibility. He actually increased the level of the dollar amount that people can be eligible for things like the Medicaid program, Badger Care. But, as was often done in the past, they didn't fully fund it. And so because of the lack of that full funding, there were people on a waiting list for care, including many people living at or below the poverty level. I'm proud to say that for the first time in our state's history, under either Republican or Democrat governor alike, for the first time ever, we're able to cover every single person in this program living under poverty. And for those above poverty, we help transition them into the marketplace. And with some of the incentives they had out there for someone just barely above, a single individual looking to get a health insurance plan could have a premium as low as $19 a month. And as their income increased, so would their premiums. But starting out, it was a pretty good deal, I think, compared to where most people are in the marketplace today. We just wanted to make sure that we could cover people. And in fact, the Kaiser Family Foundation, a well-respected and relatively objective foundation out there, not conservative, not liberal, just kind of right down the middle. The Kaiser Family Foundation pointed out that we were the only state in the country that did not take the Medicaid expansion under Obamacare, where they contend that we do not have an insurance gap, meaning there's not a gap between those who are covered and those who are not. We have one of the highest rates of coverage in the country. We've had it before. It's only gotten better over the last several years. And we did it without putting the taxpayers of the state at risk. So a legitimate question, and I hope folks can see that we did it in a thoughtful way going forward. Next up, I'll skip over this one. I actually had a question about Donald Trump, but because this is an official Facebook Live session, I'm not going to get into politics, certainly not at the national level. But the next one up is Martin P. asked, would you give a brief review of what you found in the finances of the UW system that led to the tuition freeze? Well, a couple things. First off, in terms of finances, the University of Wisconsin system today, this year, in this fiscal year, the UW system overall has the largest budget it has ever had. I know that's not widely covered in the media, but the University of Wisconsin system overall has the largest budget it has ever had. And we think that's important to know because sometimes there's talk about budget reductions. Today, they've never had a bigger budget overall than what they have, and that's because the state only provides a portion of the overall funding for the University of Wisconsin system. And they continue to have some of the best schools in the nation. That's important for me. I've got two sons, one who's graduated, but I've got another son who's a senior at the University of Wisconsin. So the UW system is important to me as governor, but it's also important to me as a parent. And if you look at it, it continues to have some of the best rankings out there. In fact, according to U.S. News and World Report, the UW at Madison moved up one notch and is one of the top schools in the country. A number of other University of Wisconsin campuses were ranked in their categories as some of the best within the region. And so we continue to have one of the best systems, not only in the country, but in many regards, when you look at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, one of the best colleges in the world. So we're proud of that. But in terms of finances, what we really looked at is we made the decision about the tuition freeze. was what I've heard time and time again. I think out of our 64 listening sessions, we heard it not only from students and parents, we heard it from seniors and employers. I hear it all over the place. People talk about the high cost of higher education, something that's not unique to the state of Wisconsin. I think since 1978, tuition in this country at our colleges and universities overall has gone up 4 times the rate of inflation. Imagine that, 4 times the rate of inflation. In our case in Wisconsin, before our tuition freeze, and I'm proud to say we froze tuition 4 years in a row. That's an all-time high. We've never been able to do that before. But in this case, in the decade before our tuition freeze, tuition in this state overall went up 118% within the University of Wisconsin system. We, over the last 4 years, have frozen tuition. I want to continue to make sure that college, the UW, is affordable both for college students and for the working families that in many cases help provide support, so that going forward, people don't take on the kind of large-scale student loan debt that they have in the past. That's why we froze tuition. We're proud to do that. And that's why we were excited to announce with a series of financial institutions. In particular, I joined the head of the University of Wisconsin, the UW Credit Union president and CEO, who announced a new plan to expand beyond just UW students and alumni, but to allow any Wisconsin resident who went to an accredited institution of higher learning in the state to have access to the very competitive rates that they have, not only for student loans, but to refinance or consolidate previous student loans in the state. That's important because we also hear, understandably, if tuition went up 118% before we came in and put in place a freeze, obviously there are many people who've got high levels of student loan debt because of what was done in the past before we took office. We want to make sure we help them out as well. Now, some have suggested creating a brand new level of government bureaucracy. When we looked at other states that did that, we realized just adding more people to the state bureaucracy isn't the answer. Instead, we went to the UW Credit Union and to other financial institutions in this state and said, let's figure out a way to work with the private sector to provide rates that are as good or better, to be competitive with the rates that we've seen in these state authorities, but not create a whole new level of government bureaucracy. And so that's what we did. Well, we've got here, we blocked off about a half an hour's worth of time. I hope that going forward you'll join us. We'll do more of these again in the future. We'll take some more questions and try and take on a few more categories. We appreciate this as one more way to connect with the great people of the state of Wisconsin, and I look forward to talking to you soon.